You know what's terrifying? Imagine you're sitting in your armored vehicle, sipping tea, thinking the war is somewhere miles away, and suddenly, boom, your tank explodes. Then another one behind you, and another. Within 15 minutes, 27 of your vehicles are burning wrecks, and you still haven't figured out where the attack is coming from. That's exactly what happened to one of Britain's most elite armored divisions on a quiet French morning in 1944. And the crazy part? It was just one tank, one single tank and its crew. Now, before we get into the chaos of what actually went down that day, let me paint you the picture of where this all started. June 1944. The Allies had just landed in Normandy. D-Day was barely a week old, the beaches were secured, and the British Army was pushing inland, confident, experienced, battle-hardened from North Africa and Italy. The 7th Armored Division, nicknamed the Desert Rats, were legends. They'd fought Rommel himself and won. These guys knew what they were doing, or at least they thought they did. Their mission was simple: break through the German lines near a small town called Villers Bocage, secure the high ground, and keep pushing toward Caen. Easy, right? The intelligence said the area was lightly defended, maybe some infantry, a few scattered units. Nothing a division of experienced tankers couldn't handle. So, on the morning of June 13th, they rolled through the narrow French country roads, feeling pretty good about their chances. Meanwhile, on the German side, things were falling apart. After D-Day, the Wehrmacht was scrambling. Units were scattered, communications were a mess, and nobody really knew where the front line was anymore. The German High Command was trying to organize a counterattack, but everything was chaos. Among the units rushing toward Normandy was the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion, and commanding one of their Tiger tanks was a guy named Michael Wittmann. Now, let me tell you about Wittmann, because understanding him is key to understanding what happened next. This wasn't some rookie tank commander. Michael Wittmann was already a legend before Villers Bocage ever happened. By June 1944, he'd destroyed over 100 enemy tanks on the Eastern Front. 100. Think about that for a second. This guy had been fighting Soviet T-34s and KV-1s in the frozen hell of Russia for years. He'd been awarded the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, which was basically the highest military honor Germany could give. When Wittmann showed up to a battle, people noticed. But here's the thing about Wittmann that made him different from other tank aces. He wasn't reckless. He didn't charge into battle like some action movie hero. He was calculated, patient, almost cold in his approach. He studied his enemies. He waited for the perfect moment. And when that moment came, he struck hard and fast. That combination of experience, skill, and ruthlessness made him absolutely deadly. On the night of June 12th, Wittmann and his crew were positioned near Villers Bocage. They'd just arrived in Normandy and were supposed to be part of a larger defensive operation, but like I said, everything was chaos. Communication was spotty. Orders were unclear. So Wittmann did what any good commander would do. He sent out a reconnaissance patrol to figure out what was happening. And that's when they spotted something interesting. British tanks, lots of them, moving through Villers Bocage in a long column, completely exposed on a narrow road. No infantry support, no air cover, just tanks and half-tracks rolling through like they owned the place. Wittmann couldn't believe what he was seeing. This was every tank commander's dream scenario. The enemy was bunched up, vulnerable, with nowhere to maneuver. One well-placed attack could cause absolute carnage. But there was a problem. Wittmann only had his own tank and maybe 4 others from his company in the immediate area. The rest of the battalion was scattered across the countryside. Any sane commander would have waited for reinforcements, reported the enemy position, and let the higher-ups figure out what to do. But Wittmann wasn't interested in waiting. He saw an opportunity, and he was going to take it. Let me describe what Wittmann was working with, because the Tiger I wasn't just any tank. This thing was a monster. It weighed 56 tons, had armor up to 100 millimeters thick, and mounted the legendary 88-millimeter gun that could punch through pretty much anything the Allies had. The Tiger was slow, it guzzled fuel like crazy, and it broke down constantly. But when it worked, when it was in the right position with a good crew, it was unstoppable. And Wittmann had one of the best crews in the entire German army. His gunner, Balthasar Woll, could hit a moving target at over a kilometer away. His loader could reload the main gun in under 6 seconds. His driver could maneuver the massive tank through terrain that would bog down lighter vehicles. These guys had been fighting together for years. They knew each other's movements, could communicate with just a glance. That kind of teamwork doesn't happen overnight. It's forged through dozens of battles, hundreds of life-or-death situations. So, early on the morning of June 13th, Wittmann made his decision. He was going to attack, alone if necessary. He positioned his Tiger on high ground overlooking the main road through Villers Bocage. From there, he had a perfect view of the British column stretched out below him. He could see Cromwell tanks, Sherman Fireflies, half-tracks full of infantry, supply vehicles. It was like looking down at a shooting gallery. Now, here's where you need to understand the British perspective. The 22nd Armored Brigade, which was leading the advance, had no idea there were any German heavy tanks in the area. Their intelligence said the nearest Tiger battalion was over 50 kilometers away. They were expecting maybe some Panzer-Ivors at worst, which their tanks could handle. So they were moving fast, not particularly worried about ambushes. The lead elements had already pushed through the town and were heading toward Point 213, a strategic hill to the east. That's when Wittmann struck. His first shot hit a Cromwell tank at the rear of the column. Direct hit. The Cromwell exploded instantly, blocking the road. Before the British could even react, Wittmann's gunner had already reloaded and fired again. Another Cromwell destroyed. Then another. The British tankers were in complete panic. They couldn't see where the fire was coming from. The Tiger was hull down on the ridge, almost invisible in the morning shadows. All they could see was their tanks exploding one after another. Within the first 90 seconds, Wittmann had destroyed 4 tanks and completely cut off the rear of the British column. Now they couldn't retreat, even if they wanted to. The road was blocked with burning wrecks. But Wittmann wasn't done, not even close. He ordered his driver to move the Tiger down off the ridge and into the town itself. This is where things get absolutely insane. Wittmann drove his Tiger right down the main street of Villers Bocage, hunting British tanks in an urban environment. This was incredibly risky. In cities, tanks are vulnerable. Infantry can get close with anti-tank weapons. There are blind corners everywhere. One well-placed shot from a hidden enemy could end everything. But Wittmann didn't care. He was in full attack mode now, and nothing was going to stop him. As he rumbled down the street, he encountered a Sherman Firefly, which was basically the only Allied tank that could reliably penetrate a Tiger's armor. The Firefly's crew saw the Tiger coming and tried to maneuver into a firing position. But Wittmann's gunner was faster. One shot. The Firefly exploded. Then Wittmann spotted 3 more Cromwells trying to find cover behind a building. He destroyed all 3 in under a minute. The British were in absolute chaos now. Radio communications were going crazy. Officers were screaming orders. Tank crews were abandoning their vehicles and running for cover. Nobody knew what was happening. Some thought they were being attacked by an entire German panzer division. The idea that this was just one tank hadn't even occurred to them. Wittmann continued his rampage through Villers Bocage. He destroyed half-tracks, armored cars, scout vehicles. Anything that moved, he shot. His crew was working like a machine. Load, aim, fire. Load, aim, fire. The 88-millimeter gun roared again and again. Smoke filled the streets. Buildings were on fire. British soldiers were running in every direction. At one point, Wittmann encountered a column of half-tracks full of British infantry. He couldn't have been more than 50 meters away. His gunner fired high-explosive rounds into them, causing devastating casualties. The survivors scattered into the buildings, but they were equipped with light weapons, nothing that could threaten a Tiger. Wittmann just kept moving forward. Now you might be wondering where the rest of Wittmann's company was during all this. Good question. 4 other Tigers from his unit had heard the shooting and were trying to join the fight. But the roads were narrow and clogged with destroyed British vehicles. They couldn't get into position quickly enough. So for the critical first 15 minutes of the battle, Wittmann really was fighting alone. The British finally started to organize some kind of defense. A group of anti-tank guns was rushed into position near the town square. These were 6-pounder guns, which could potentially damage a Tiger if they hit it in the right spot. The British gunners were brave, you have to give them that. They held their fire until Wittmann's Tiger turned a corner and came into view at close range. Then they opened up. Several rounds hit the Tiger's frontal armor. But here's the thing about the Tiger's design. The front armor was over 100 millimeters thick and sloped. The 6-pounder rounds just bounced off. Wittmann's gunner calmly traversed the turret, aimed, and destroyed both anti-tank guns with 2 shots. The British gun crews didn't even have time to reload. By this point, Wittmann had been fighting for about 20 minutes. His tank had taken several hits, but nothing serious. He'd destroyed somewhere between 20 and 27 British vehicles, depending on which historical account you believe. The exact number is still debated by historians, but everyone agrees it was at least 20. For a single tank in a single engagement, that's absolutely unprecedented. But Wittmann knew he couldn't push his luck forever. He was deep in enemy territory, his ammunition was running low, and more British reinforcements would be arriving soon. Plus, his Tiger was starting to show signs of mechanical stress. The transmission was making weird noises, which was never a good sign. So he made the decision to withdraw. Getting out was almost as dangerous as going in. Wittmann had to back his Tiger down the same street he'd driven up, all while under fire from British infantry hiding in the buildings. Small arms fire pinged off the armor. Someone even threw a Molotov cocktail that splashed burning fuel across the front of the tank. But the Tiger kept moving. Wittmann's driver was incredibly skilled, backing the massive vehicle through the narrow streets without getting stuck or blocked. Finally, after what must have felt like an eternity, Wittmann's Tiger cleared the town and reached the German lines. He'd done it. he'd single-handedly ambushed and destroyed a significant portion of an elite British armored brigade. The other Tigers from his company had also engaged the British column from different positions, destroying additional vehicles, but Wittmann's personal tally was the highest. Now, let's talk about the aftermath, because this battle had huge consequences. For the British, Villers Bocage was a disaster. The 7th Armored Division's advance was completely halted. They'd lost over 30 vehicles in less than an hour. Worse, they'd lost their momentum and their confidence. These were veteran soldiers who'd fought all over the world, and they'd just been shredded by a force they never even saw coming. The psychological impact was enormous. The British commanders were furious. How had intelligence failed so badly? Why were there Tiger tanks in an area that was supposed to be clear? Heads rolled, figuratively speaking. Orders were issued to be more cautious, to scout ahead more thoroughly. The aggressive push toward Caen was put on hold while the British regrouped and reassessed. For the Germans, Villers Bocage was a propaganda goldmine. Wittmann became an instant superstar. His picture was in all the newspapers. He was promoted, decorated, sent on publicity tours. The Nazi propaganda machine loved it. Here was proof that German soldiers were superior, that one Tiger could defeat dozens of Allied tanks, that the invasion could still be stopped. Of course, the reality was more complicated, but propaganda doesn't care about complexity. Wittmann himself was apparently uncomfortable with all the attention. By most accounts, he was a quiet, professional soldier who just wanted to get back to his unit and keep fighting. But he was too valuable as a propaganda symbol now. The German High Command needed heroes, needed victories, even small tactical ones, to maintain morale as the strategic situation got worse and worse. And here's the thing that often gets forgotten in all the celebration of Wittmann's tactical brilliance. The Battle of Villers Bocage didn't actually change anything in the long run. The British were delayed by a day, maybe two. They regrouped, brought up reinforcements, and continued their advance. Within a week, the area around Villers Bocage was in Allied hands. The German defenders, including Wittmann's unit, had to withdraw. This is important because it highlights a fundamental truth about the Western Front in 1944. Individual tactical brilliance couldn't overcome strategic reality. The Allies had more men, more tanks, more planes, more supplies. They could replace their losses. The Germans couldn't. Every Tiger destroyed was a major loss. Every experienced crew killed was irreplaceable. The war of attrition was grinding Germany down, and no amount of tank ace heroics could stop it. But let's get back to Wittmann, because his story doesn't end at Villers Bocage. After all the publicity and promotion, he returned to his unit and continued fighting in Normandy throughout June and July 1944. And here's where the legend starts to fade and reality sets in. Because modern tank warfare in 1944 wasn't like the Eastern Front where Wittmann had made his reputation. In Normandy, the Allies had total air superiority. That meant that German tanks could barely move during daylight hours, without being spotted and attacked by Allied fighter bombers. The famous Hawker Typhoons with their rockets were absolutely devastating against armor. Even the mighty Tiger was vulnerable to air attack. Its top armor was relatively thin, and a rocket or bomb from above could destroy it easily. Wittmann and his crew survived several air attacks in the weeks after Villers Bocage. Their luck held, but luck doesn't last forever in war. On August 8th, 1944. Less than 2 months after his famous victory, Michael Wittmann was dead. The circumstances of his death are still somewhat controversial. We know he was killed during a massive Allied offensive near the village of Sinto. British and Canadian forces were pushing south, and Wittmann's Tiger unit was ordered to counterattack. It was a chaotic battle involving dozens of tanks on both sides, with Allied aircraft circling overhead like vultures. According to some accounts, Wittmann's Tiger was hit by a Sherman Firefly commanded by a Canadian gunner named Joe Eakins. Eakins was in an overwatch position and got off a perfect flank shot that penetrated the Tiger's side armor. The tank exploded, killing Wittmann and his entire crew instantly. That's the version the Allies like to tell, and there's decent evidence to support it. But other historians argue that Wittmann was actually killed by a Typhoon rocket attack. There were multiple British aircraft operating in the area at the time, and several reported destroying Tigers. Given the chaos of the battle, it's entirely possible that Wittmann was hit from the air, and the ground units just thought they got the kill. War is confusing. Sometimes nobody knows who shot who. A third theory suggests that Wittmann was hit by British anti-tank guns that had been cleverly positioned in the bocage, the thick hedgerows that covered the Normandy countryside. These guns were well camouflaged and had good fields of fire. Wittmann might have driven right into a perfectly planned ambush. The truth is, we'll probably never know exactly what killed Michael Wittmann. His body wasn't recovered until decades after the war. The Tiger was a burned-out wreck. The combat records from that day are incomplete and contradictory. What we do know is that he died the way he'd lived, in combat, fighting against overwhelming odds. And here's the ironic part. Wittmann died in almost exactly the same kind of situation that had made him famous at Villers Bocage. He was pushing forward aggressively in a Tiger tank, trying to achieve tactical surprise against a numerically superior enemy. But this time, the surprise worked against him. This time, he was the one who got ambushed. War has a way of evening things out. So, what's the legacy of Villers Bocage and Michael Wittmann? That's a complicated question. From a purely military standpoint, it was a brilliant tactical action that had minimal strategic impact. Wittmann's attack delayed the British advance, but didn't stop it. It boosted German morale, but didn't change the outcome of the Normandy campaign. From a technical perspective, the battle demonstrated both the strengths and weaknesses of the Tiger tank. In the right circumstances, with a skilled crew and good positioning, it was absolutely dominant. But it was also slow, unreliable, and vulnerable to air attack. The same qualities that made it a deadly ambush predator made it a liability in a war of movement. The battle also highlighted the importance of intelligence and reconnaissance. The British were caught completely off guard because their intelligence was wrong. They assumed the area was safe when it wasn't. That one mistake cost them dozens of vehicles and hundreds of casualties. Modern military analysts still study Villers Bocage as an example of what happens when you don't properly scout ahead. But I think the most interesting legacy is the way Villers Bocage has been remembered and mythologized. For decades after the war, it was held up as proof of German tactical superiority. Tank enthusiasts and military historians wrote thousands of pages analyzing Wittmann's actions. He became almost a mythical figure, the perfect tank commander. And look, there's no denying that what Wittmann accomplished that day was impressive. Destroying 20-plus vehicles in a single engagement requires incredible skill, courage, and luck. But the way the story has been told often leaves out important context. It doesn't mention that the British column was improperly deployed, that they had no infantry support, that their intelligence had failed. It doesn't mention that other German tanks were also involved in the battle. It doesn't mention that the British ultimately won the campaign. This selective memory is a good reminder that history isn't just facts and dates. It's narratives, it's stories, and different people tell those stories in different ways depending on what point they're trying to make. Some people want to celebrate individual heroism, some want to analyze tactical decisions, some want to understand the broader strategic picture. All of these approaches are valid, but they can lead to very different interpretations of the same events. There's also a darker side to the Wittmann legend that needs to be acknowledged. Michael Wittmann was a member of the Waffen-SS, which was a military organization deeply involved in war crimes and the Holocaust. Now, there's no evidence that Wittmann personally participated in atrocities, and by all accounts, he was focused on being a tank commander, not a war criminal. But he was part of an organization that committed unspeakable evil. This creates a moral complexity that's sometimes glossed over when people talk about Villers Bocage. Can you admire someone's tactical skill while condemning the cause they fought for? Should we celebrate military achievement when it was in service of Nazi Germany? These are uncomfortable questions, and different people have different answers. But they're questions worth asking. In recent years, historians have tried to take a more balanced view of both Villers Bocage and Wittmann himself. They acknowledge his skill as a tank commander while also placing his actions in the broader context of the war. They point out that individual tactical victories meant little when the strategic situation was hopeless. They note that the Tiger tank, for all its fearsome reputation, was ultimately a failed design that consumed resources Germany couldn't afford. There's also been more attention paid to the British perspective. For years, Villers Bocage was portrayed as a humiliating defeat for the Desert Rats. But modern historians have pointed out that the British learned from their mistakes, adapted their tactics, and ultimately achieved their objectives. The 7th Armored Division went on to fight effectively for the rest of the war. They weren't broken by Villers Bocage, they were just delayed. The technological lessons from Villers Bocage are also worth considering. The battle demonstrated that heavily armored tanks could dominate in certain situations, but it also showed their limitations. Tigers were maintenance nightmares. They broke down constantly. They used so much fuel that keeping them supplied was a logistical challenge. They were too heavy for most bridges. They got stuck in mud. The Allies, particularly the Americans, took a different approach. Instead of building a few super-heavy tanks like the Tiger, they built thousands of reliable medium tanks like the Sherman. Sure, a Sherman couldn't beat a Tiger in a one-on-one fight, but there were never one-on-one fights. There were 5 Shermans against 1 Tiger, 10 Shermans, 20 Shermans, and eventually, through sheer numbers and superior logistics, the Shermans won. This is sometimes called the quantity versus quality debate, and it's been going on since Villers Bocage. Were the Germans right to focus on building the best possible tanks, even if they could only build a few? Or were the Allies right to focus on building adequate tanks in massive quantities? History suggests the Allies had the right approach, at least for World War II. But it's still an interesting question. One aspect of Villers Bocage that doesn't get enough attention is the experience of the ordinary soldiers involved. Think about what it must have been like to be a British tanker that day. You're driving through a quiet French town, maybe thinking about home, maybe wondering what you'll have for lunch. Then suddenly, there's an enormous explosion behind you. You look back and see one of your company's tanks burning. Then another explosion. Another tank gone. You're screaming into the radio trying to figure out what's happening, but everyone else is screaming too, and nobody knows anything. Do you bail out of your tank and run? Do you try to fight back even though you can't see the enemy? Do you just freeze in terror and hope the next shot doesn't hit you? These are impossible decisions that teenage and 20-something kids had to make in split seconds. Many of them made the wrong decision and died. Many of them made the right decision and still died. That's the reality of combat that gets lost in discussions of tactics and technology. And think about Wittmann's crew, too. Yes, they were skilled professionals who'd been fighting for years, but they were also human beings in an incredibly stressful situation. They were outnumbered probably 50-1. One mechanical failure, one lucky enemy shot, and they'd all be dead. The loader is exhausted from hauling heavy shells. The driver's hands are cramping from working the controls. The gunner's eyes are burning from staring through the sight. The radio operator is trying to make sense of confused reports while shells are exploding around them. These human elements are what make Villers Bocage more than just a tactical case study. It was a moment when a few dozen people's lives intersected in the most violent way possible. Some of them went home, many of them didn't. All of them were changed by the experience. In the decades since the war, Villers Bocage has become a site of remembrance. There are memorials to both the British and German soldiers who fought there. The town itself was largely destroyed during the battle and the subsequent fighting, but it's been rebuilt. You can visit today and see markers showing where various actions took place. There's even a small museum with artifacts from the battle. Every year, veterans and military historians gather at Villers Bocage to remember what happened there. These commemorations are interesting because they bring together people who might have been enemies during the war. Old men who once tried to kill each other now shake hands and share stories. It's a reminder that the soldiers on both sides were just people caught up in events beyond their control. The tactical lessons from Villers Bocage are still studied in military academies around the world. The importance of reconnaissance, the dangers of bunched-up formations, the value of combined arms operations where tanks work with infantry and artillery. These are all principles that modern armies still follow. In a weird way, the soldiers who died at Villers Bocage contributed to military knowledge that has saved lives in subsequent conflicts. But maybe the most important lesson from Villers Bocage is about the nature of war itself. No matter how good you are, no matter how skilled or brave or well-equipped, war is ultimately chaos. Michael Wittmann was probably the best tank commander in the world in June 1944. He had the best tank, the best crew, the best training. And 2 months later, he was dead, killed in some confused engagement that nobody can even accurately describe. That's war. That's what it does to people. If you're interested in learning more about World War II tank warfare, there are thousands of books and documentaries out there. But remember that every statistic, every tactical analysis, every discussion of armor thickness and gun calibers represents real human beings who lived and died. The numbers on a page were people with families and dreams and fears. That's something we should never forget. If this kind of deep dive into history interests you, hit that subscribe button.